Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody, all three of us. But hey, it's going to be for posterity's sake, and whoever would like to watch this and kind of go over the conversation of disinfecting Jesus. This is we're covering the four horsemen of meaning with Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, Bishop Barron. Well, that's a tongue twister, and of course a lovely friend Jonathan Pageau as well. So how does this apply to disinfecting Jesus? Well, they start off the conversation talking about what I would feel, and I think this is what Jordan's saying, is that it's a crisis of meaning. So this is very applicable to disinfecting Jesus, we feel, because as they talk about meaning and what meaning means, we can kind of figure out a little bit, or maybe more, of the disinfectant for the infections within religion. So I mentioned in the intro for the crew that we talked about, that Bishop Barron talks about flattening of things within religion during his lifetime experience. And Pageau talks of possibly meeting more of the transcendent with the group sacred space of religious ritual. But and our main question we'll come back to here at the end, which will be, are we expecting too much of the religious facilitators in that, or should we look for more grassroots efforts to fill the void? So like I said, we're going to come back to that. We've got a couple questions that we're going to start off with on our couple rungs, not below, but beyond, as Michael and I were talking about briefly today before we started, about you know, what we're trying to do is distill a little bit more of this message that the guys have, and maybe kind of really kind of look at this a little bit more beyond their scope of individual interest, or how did you put it, Michael? You had a great way of posing that.
Well, thank you. But I'm old and I forgot what I said. It was so
well.
But it was very good. I remember it as feeling very good about the tone of it. But I forget the details because I'm only 3 years younger than you.
Well, yes. And what I was saying was it's the abstractions, because these guys bring abstractions from their individual disciplines, and they're wonderful men. But sometimes it can be a bit lofty for us in the pews or in the audience. So I felt this is why I feel crews like Disinfecting Jesus and discussions about these videos that Rebel Wisdom puts out and Jordan Peterson and others put out is so prescient, because it's like we need to be having more of these conversations around them, and not just kind of sitting there going, wow, that was really impressive. And you know, I think, you know, because what that does, I think, is, you know, it kind of is disconnective of applying what they're talking about. And I think we in the audience or pews have an ability to really discuss this at another level that is hopefully more applicable or just more impersonal. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted to kind of start this off, and we'll give Tom the benefit here, if you'd like, to maybe asking, you know, what do you think meaning means, and what do you think it signifies?
What's it all about?
Right. Yeah.
Alfie, is it just for the moment that we live? Yeah, you know. Yeah, well, let's put it in song, as I am wont to do, being the performing artist at heart. To me, you know, well, I think that the one who defines it for me is Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning, and his logotherapy. But you know, let's not go into that right now. But yeah, I think more existential. You know, that's what I get out of philosophy, traditional philosophy. After I moved beyond my religious Jehovah's Witnesses phase, well, that's what I found. Like Socrates, you know, so much of the conversations they're asking is about a greater meaning of life. So that's, to me, what philosophy, a lover of wisdom, was. More Socratic, or as we mentioned earlier before the recording came on, wisdom traditions of the East, such as in Buddhism, stands the or minus the what would you call it, the caste system in India, which Buddhism just put aside. So that question, who am I? What am I? Where am I going? You know, what's it all about? existentially for me, the individual, and of course, greater meaning for us as a collective of individuals. That's it.
Yeah, one of the central themes of existentialism is that existence precedes essence, right? So that instead of the propositional world that these four horsemen were pushing against, instead of that propositional world, which has an essence and at its worst has a dogma to it, how do we get good religious meaning beyond the simple propositional and often dogmatic and doctrinaire and whatnot elements, which I agree with these four horsemen tends to choke off the experience of connectedness, etc. Yeah.
So and we'll come back to kind of likes and dislikes. I realize we kind of jumped the gun a bit, but I kind of wanted to get into the questions. So was there a succinct kind of, what would you say is, what do you think meaning means and what do you think it signifies? That seems like a broad statement, but maybe we can rope it into something a bit more personal for you, Mike. Is it too much?
Well, no, I just, the term meaning is ultimately to me, it has a individual and peculiar, it should have that definition, so that meaning really boils down to something similar to beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. Okay. And it's if anybody wants to tell me what something means, well, then they're actually telling me what it means to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Not necessarily universally applicable. So that would be my view on meaning. And what was the other part of the question?
What do you think it signifies?
Well, I think they're right. The four horsemen are right in saying that there's a crisis of meaning. And I think that, I look at things more historically than they do, but they're coming from their generally psychological disciplines. Psychology is sort of a foundation to these guys. And as they pointed out, they're all Canadian. So they haven't been totally damaged.
Minus Bishop Barron, he's an American.
Right. But he pointed that out, that the other three were Canadians, and so they haven't been quite as damaged as we have in terms of our split up world of politics and media and that sort of thing that we've ended up in this country. The healing part is necessary, and I think these guys can inform us in terms of how to approach the more connected, less flattened, how we can approach the more transcendent, use the more transcendent. And in Bishop's world, it's the beauty. I think, they all anchored some of this discussion in the great Greek traditions of what is true, which is what can you know, what is good, which is ethics and morals, and then beauty, which is not that much subject to, it can be subject to analysis, but it's not so bifurcated because it's in the eye of the beholder, So I think they've informed us well on that. And my own experience with these people, I resonated with all of them, really did. But it was so dense, I haven't even quite finished the whole thing, and I've been at it for 2 days now, yesterday afternoon and this morning. And, but they have these, there was a desire that was sort of in one little sentence that Peterson said up front. He said, I like to get with you guys because because the conversation is relevant to me. But he said also, we do this to hopefully make the world better. So there was a moral underpinning, apparently, to Peterson's interest in getting the group together. And then making it available to us. And so I like that part of it. I most resonated with, who is it, John V? Is that, okay.
Yeah.
Because he and I come from the same damage. And I think, Tom, you might also, which was the horrors of growing up in a fundamentalist tradition. And then, you know, that those dogmas peeling away, and you know, where do you go from there? And in my experience, I went to a very good university and got a very good academic training. So I was able to expand my doctoral work. I minored in philosophy. So, and it was pretty much a historical approach. My major was historical theology. So I have all that historical work in my educational background. So that's where I kind of come from a lot of this. And it you know, it took quite a while to, in fact, I'm almost 3/4 of a century old, and I still recognize, in some sense, even more intensely, the damage of that background that I had. I don't mean to sound like a victim. A lot of people have come through it. Tom, you've come through it, and you know how to play a ukulele and sing.
That's right.
So, you know, this is, people do come through it, and they must.
And some other shit that's not all that important, but
one way or the other, they must, or you know, they're stuck with arrested development. And how you get that reconciled and whatnot, it boils down to each person's the results in their lives.
Well, you're speaking to something that's very prescient, even on the comments right now, because Monica Bravo and a few others are talking about a gentleman named Gabo Mate. I probably brutalized his first name there, but he deals with trauma. And then there's something today, I believe, with Thomas Hubble, who also deals more with collective trauma. And this is something that the Four Horsemen don't bring up very much, I think, because they're not really specialists necessarily. But I think it's worth mentioning and bringing up as far as, you know, both individual and collective trauma and how that affects how we define meaning. For me, meaning, as there was a video a few years ago on TED Talks about the information age. And, you know, I see this especially with older folk, as far as there's a feeling of inundation with information. And the TED Talks basic point was that we don't have a problem of too much information. We have a problem of filter. So I would define meaning as the appropriation of a certain value structure. And I feel that previous generations were a lot better than we've done in the last few decades of at least cultivating even a commonsensical value structure. But I think that we're coming back to that, and we're coming back to that need. And so that appropriate, you know, and it's not just the appropriation of a value structure. It's as you've kind of pointed out with me in our personal discussions, Mike, it's almost like, it's like, I feel like it's the lack thereof. But like you pointed out, it's like even just having a very simplistic or maybe a very survivalist value structure is a value structure. And so, you know, we do define meaning that way. And that's what I would say, what meaning means. What does it signify? I just think it comes back to the crisis of meaning. I think we're having a collective crisis of meaning while at the same time dealing with a lot more individual and collective trauma. So how do we parse those? How do we balance those? How do we come out? And this is where I think the Four Horsemen are really touching on some things as far as, you know, we need to ask ourselves, not just what helps us get by, but what is transformational. And you know, when we define spirituality, Bishop Barron talks about kind of the psychologicalizing, if that's a word,
psychologizing, yeah,
is certain things within the church. But I think that we've almost kind of got a self-help society. I read some stuff about 2 or 3 decades ago about how the role of the priest got assumed by the psychologist, and we really see it with somebody like Peterson and the prominence he's gained in the last few years. Is that for certain that the psychologist and the therapist has taken over the role of the priest, and I think at a certain loss, because there is these mystical elements that I don't think psychology necessarily covers very well. Jung actually was broaching on some things in some of his stuff, but I haven't been exhaustive about his work, and I'm not a psychologist or therapist. But what I have studied of some of the case studies, or quite a few case studies, is that there is definitely import for the mystical, and just opening up the vulnerability that's within the what we could call the sacred environment. Anyway, so on to that question 2. So religious meaning supposedly is trying to deal with broaching on this, deal with the deepest depths of meaning. Where do we feel it's succeeding and failing for ourselves right now, or society? I mean, you guys talked about, or more you, Michael, as far as your history, and Vervaeke talked about his history of being kind of traumatized with early Protestantism, or just kind of the indoctrination. But
fundamentalism, not Protestantism.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. But where do you think, are there areas that start? I always like to start with the positive notes. Do either of you feel like some things are succeeding within religious structures, Tom?
Yeah, I do. I was not raised religious, so I don't have childhood trauma as a consequence of someone raised in, say, Southern Baptist religion or Mormon or Jehovah's Witness. I don't know what Vervaake's fundamentalist religion was, and as Michael knows, that has a certain specific meaning in Protestant Christianity that gets generally applied to other areas. But for me, I have trauma from childhood, but not related. So the years I was a Jehovah's Witness, active, say age 23 to 35, they were good for me. I needed that. I needed church stuff. I needed that structure. I oftentimes think, well, if I knew then what I know now, what would I tell young Tom? I said, well, maybe not a Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, maybe not Southern Baptist, but what is that church that pretty much Jimmy Carter goes to? Maybe that would have been better. But how to do that, where to go, I don't know. But it was a good thing. So they are doing some good things. And in my family, my sister, who was raised by other people, Assembly of God, and very conservative, charismatic, if you will, or my brother Casey, he and his wife, got churched up, and they go to some evangelical church. This is a good thing. So they're doing something right in that more conservative to moderate realm. There's something there. It helped me. It was a step along the way. So I outgrew it and needed to move on, and there was nothing there for me. And my way of finding it was through meditation, through Buddhist meditation, centering prayer, a more introspective, see for yourself, meditative type of tradition. So just how do you connect? That was kind of what Wilbur was wanting to do. How the conveyor belt of spirituality, how do we make that more like there seem to be trying to do in the centering prayer movement that you find within the Catholic Church and Episcopalians, but it's like a little side thing that kind of sneaks its way in, they tolerate. So that's it. So to me, it's generally they're getting something right, but there's like, that's it. Grammar school's over, you're done. Well, I need a spiritual high school, a spiritual, university, a spiritual graduate study, and okay, it just needs to be more. Where do we go once that is done? What good it's got to give?
So Terry, just filling you in, we're on question number 2 on that intro. Religious meaning supposedly is trying to deal with the deepest depths of meaning. Where have we felt it is succeeding or failing for ourselves or culture right now? So Tom was talking about, I wanted to kind of focus on the positive first, as far as, some of the positives, like talking about contemplative prayer and some of those ancient wisdom practices is what I call them. But that's what's working right and I think there's been a movement within that for the last couple, decades, probably, from what I've noticed, maybe since the 60s or 70s. I haven't tracked it back that far. And I know in New Thought groups, I do see some innovation, and you've probably seen some pretty innovative things within the New Thought groups. But it's just like, what? Yes, Michael.
I just wanted to briefly, I know you're filling Terry in, but I wanted to briefly respond to Tom's lack of churching and what do you do next, and once you slough off the bad experiences you've got. And in my case, I had, after all that work, graduate work, etc., and my whole life in the church, literally Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, and all kinds of activities in between during the week. That was my life. I spent about a dozen years just not walking through the doors of any church, and found a kind of oasis in the Unitarian tradition before it became so leftist, and it's great liberal, at least in the church I was a part of. And one other thing I wanted to mention about something you said earlier, Clint, about psychology has overwhelmed the best part of religious meaning. But it was mentioned in this, and I think it's true. I don't remember if it was John V. or whoever mentioned it, but it was the bishop. And he said the early church followers were psychologists. And I think that there is that, I think that has a substance to it, because they dealt with some underlining things that can make us go beyond the flattened surface of our lives. And so they dug deep. I remember one time in a seminar, somebody saying Augustine was he had the first autobiography because he was so confessional in it, one of those great moments when he said, "Lord, deliver me from my debaucheries, but not quite yet," which is a psychological understanding of himself, So psychology per se, I don't think is antithetical to good religious meaning. I guess that's my point. By the way, hi Terry, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. So where would you like to start? Anywhere? I mean, since you're just coming into this, we've been kind of already having a bit of a discussion, but feel free to just kind of say what is on your mind about this video, about what we've been talking about just in a few minutes you've been here.
Well, unfortunately, I only got through the first round where the four of them say what meaning is.
Okay.
So I do want to see the rest eventually. There's just been too much going on. And I liked how they all pointed to a nested meaning, that everything we do has a meaning behind that, and a meaning behind that, and a meaning behind that. I really liked that. And I really liked Father Barron's picking up on truth, beauty, and goodness as ultimate pointers. For me, they are ultimate pointers. When I first heard Steve McIntosh say that in Evolutionary Spirituality, and oh God, that's beautiful. I don't have, as you guys know, I do not have the resistance you guys do. You all kind of went away mad or hurt or what have you, jilted from traditional religion, whereas I just gently fell away. So I'm actually less interested in the what's not working part. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that, and more interested in how can we reclaim the good part.
Well, I think there needs to be all parts of the spectrum with the discussion. I wouldn't say I went through a period where I was jilted for sure, but then I realized the humanity and just there's a lot of systemic issues that I kind of see. And because I got to know a lot of different ministers and a lot of different, I would say, sectarian alliances within the Christian church, I really didn't think any of them were wrong per se. I felt like they all had part of the truth, but yet one constant I saw was that the error, at least at that level, I'm saying the error or just kind of things the toxicity within what I would call more now churchianity versus Christianity was in just how much depended on survival for them. So it's just kind of like, so they get to a point of exegesis or just understanding. I mean, I was in a coffee shop a few days ago, and I was overhearing a conversation between a minister and a couple of his key people. And it was very much that survivalist kind of conversation I heard from individual ministers. So I understand that there's higher levels of things that are affecting, but I don't have that chip on my shoulder. I don't feel like I even have the trauma anymore. And I think that's the other aspect of this that we talked a little bit about on the comments about Thomas Hubbell's collective trauma and Gabamote talking about individual trauma that Monica Bravo is bringing up and other people. This is like, I think this kind of also comes into religion, and the Four Horsemen don't really address that part. But I think, like you're saying, I think it's a huge inquiry, to undertake, and it's like where they go to a little bit of an advertisement for the finishing, like the discussion is that I really do like where they end up, because they talk about really connection being the main issue. And I felt like Bishop Barron was very honest about just his experience within the church as far as the flattening of things and trying to be overly relevant. That sounds like it wouldn't be a problem, but it's just like when you're trying to appropriate timeless truths. And so they come back to, say, for instance, Jordan Peterson's, the popularity of his Old Testament lectures. And one thing they talk a lot about is top-down type of, thinking. And Peterson just really aptly just nails it when he says, it's like, well, maybe why they're so popular is because I'm not coming from as a church authority. I'm coming at it from a much more investigative manner. And so that's appealing to people because he's like, I don't have all the answers. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, that resonated with me a lot, because it was as opposed to the dogma and I've got the truth and you can listen or not listen and you should take notes.
Yeah.
It was, we're on an adventure here, and can you join me in this adventure? And I think I haven't seen any of those lectures, but I think that's an insight that he has, that it's why people come. They want to be a part of the adventure of curiosity and hopefully driving toward better religious meaning when he unfolds scripture, however he does it. And apparently it's pretty good.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, just briefly, then I'll pass it back to you, because Terry kind of came in after I spoke on this. So my stand, unlike Michael and Vervaeke, who have stated that they were traumatized by a fundamentalist religion, I was not. I was a member of one, but I came in as an adult. So my childhood traumas from being unchurched and a wild and crazy and dysfunctional family. And so my becoming a Jehovah's Witnesses was ultimately a positive experience. It was a step up for me. And I found it to be kind of like my spiritual grammar school. Where do you go after that? Or what would be a better way to do that? Not Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or Southern Baptists, but maybe something, maybe conservative to moderate, but you could outgrow. How to do that's my question, and move on like I did, many did, to say centering prayer or Buddhist meditative practices, to move on to the beyond, from the exoteric, I would say, to the esoteric. So that you might recall Ken Wilber's concept of a spiritual conveyor belt. How can we get up to the next floor and is this it? So that's more my stand, how to grow from that. And where would I recommend some young fellow who's reading or woman who's reading 12 Rules of Life, next 12 Rules of Life? What kind of church would I point them out to go to? That's my question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I almost feel like there's I think that we have right now, we have a bifurcated world of spiritual inquiry. We have, what I feel like I mentioned in the intro as Sam Harris calls a pathology of order. So, and this happens in times of increased fear and just uncertainty, that religions.
What is that? What is that, Clint? Is that a desire for order?
No, it's beyond a desire for order. It's an obsession with order, because when we have a pathology of order, I mean, and he compares it to a pathology of chaos. There's these two pathologies of order and chaos. And I would say, I don't really understand too much of the pathology of chaos, honestly. But I mean, I do understand the pathology of order, because having been in religion for most of my life and studied different aspects of different traditions and different approaches, I would say that, I mean, I just noticed it when I went to Hawaii. I visited a friend of a friend, and there was, he was very dead center as far as, okay, he's an ascetic. What he wanted to experience was very specific, and I felt a little bit a loss because of the lack of connectivity that could have been held. But luckily, it was kind of cool. I took him to a Buddhist temple, and he did engage with the people there, and it was a much more open experience. And that's what I try to do with people who have that kind of, those very narrow blinders, rather than try to rationalize with them and show them that, like, that doesn't make sense. It's like, because what they're getting from it, the certainty out of that pathology of order within certain spiritual traditions that are coming out right now, or have been around for a while, that come around in chaotic times. I don't want to, and this came from actually a book I read by one of Jung's proteges, a gal who just died recently, June Singer, had a book, The Boundaries of the Soul. And in it, she had an example of somebody who was on death row that that early on, he was traumatized because he was gay, and because he was adopted by a foster family that was very fundamentalist. And it's just, and her point was that when we try to convince somebody that something is wrong, even if it is wrong, we need to look at the effects of what that had for him. It put him on a crime spree. He became a serial killer. That's why he was on death row. And it was just like, seriously, we got to look at, like, when we think something is just propositional. That's why I think a lot of what these guys are talking about, as far as getting outside the propositional of religion and getting into something that's like, okay, where is that next level? Like, I never heard, Tom, that you talk about that you feel like your Jehovah's Witness thing was a good step.
All things considered, it was a positive for me. It was good. What would I recommend that? Well, maybe not so conservative and fundamentalist, like I think in terms of, well, Jimmy Carter, who was in the Southern Baptist tradition. I have members of my family are. Michael, I believe that's what you said you were, or something like it. Well, Jimmy Carter was, and he moved on. And I've read about, in Baptist churches, there are so many of them, but it's a much more moderate, if not indeed liberal version. Well, where is there a church like Jimmy Carter's Baptist Church around here that I could send young Tom to, as opposed to Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons? That's it. Yeah.
That brings up a thing that I've seen in experience. It's just like, it's almost like when people sit there and go, those Baptists, or those Pentecostals, it's just like, there's bad actors in there, and there's some whole host of things that can ruin the soul, for lack of better terminology. But yeah, Michael.
The Jimmy Carter Southern Baptist, Little Plains, Georgia place, that Baptist church there, he and his family helped to desegregate that church. And so fundamentalist Southern Baptists who were on their way to taking control of the convention, along with Moral Majority and these other organizations, political, combining with Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, so that they defeated Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, one of his unpardonable sins was the desegregation of that church, and the pointing to the Southern Baptists in the South, their long tradition of applying Christianity in very sick ways in terms of their culture and the politics and whatnot. And it was about how we're going to grow. And I think absolutes one of the reasons the hard right wing fundamentalist groups took over the convention at large was because people like absolutes. And they were going to give them the fundamentals that were going to be absolute. And if you weren't with us, you were against us. Ultimately, the convention split. But it goes to something I remember in my church, which in many ways we were very helpful to each other. And it was a wonderful kind of experience as a kid, being, uncritical of what my mom and dad were bringing me to all the time. And that was what we had at the back of the church. And I've thought about this quite a bit. We had a membership roster that was at the back of almost every Baptist church I went into in my youth. And it was a membership roster. And how many members do you have? How many visitors? Et cetera, et cetera. And so there was this roster of growth, basically. What are we doing as a church to grow? And it was looking at us every time we came in the church. What we did not have at the back of that church were the Beatitudes, which could be bridges to people who were different colors, who did not walk into our church. It could be bridges to all kinds of people searching for really good, authentic religious meaning.
Was that a Southern Baptist church you belonged to? Was that your?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Because that's what. Cause I have a cousin who was born just a little older than you in 45, and they were raised Southern Baptist. My Aunt Margie, Jackie moved to Florida and married a minister. And he liberalized. I've had some communication with him since then, where he retired as a Presbyterian minister. He liberalized, but he stayed with the church and stayed a minister. And that's why I'm very interested, like you or him, somebody who came from that. Like my question, what would be a good place for a young wanker like Tom who needs churched up? And I just imagine in my imagination something like Jimmy Carter's church that is of that congregational structure, whether individual churches, Baptist or whatever, is there something like that you would recommend a young Tom or these people who are reading Jordan Peterson? It's guys like you or my cousin or Bishop Barron. Well, it's going to be Catholic Church for him. I would have no clue. Where would I point them? So if Jimmy Carter's church was here in Olympia, I'd say, go over there, man. Go to that church that Jimmy Carter's a member of. That's what I would say. And then go from that. And then maybe a centering prayer or something else as they outgrew that, What do you say about that, Michael? Would you know something you would recommend?
Well, I'll just say this briefly, and that is that my time and my direction, by the time I left undergraduate, I did all of my work at Baylor, undergraduate, master's, doctoral. I did all of it there. And it's partly because but there was a great variety. It was an excellent education. The pressures began to come from the fundamentalists and seminary groups. And so there was a lot of churches that I could have recommended, not many relative to most, but a lot. And so since then, the Southern Baptist Convention is split. I think they've lost 2,000 members in general, 2 million, I'm sorry, in general over the last few years, just because of their approach to politics, partly. But there was and particularly when I was in college, my goodness, the diversity among students, diversity in the graduate seminars I was in, left open a lot of ferment for good religious meaning, a lot of it.
That leaves hope for me, but you may not know today because you're so far away from that, but hopefully something like that exists today where someone who just needs a moderate structure, some guidance, a certainty that you can escape down the road. That's what I would like to see. Well, somebody like Jordan Peterson et al. Talking about where would they send those guys who are reading 12 Rules for Life and need churched up like young Tom needed,
I think there's a tendency to kind of want these quick answers, like just in the discussion as far as having something in a box, as far as when it comes to the psychedelics. It's just like, and I think we in our society want to pigeonhole and just demonize certain denominations, certain groups, and I just don't think it can be done. I'm thinking of when I lived in California on the coast, there was a lovely Mormon gentleman that he would actually do more than I would do, which is I like to kind of go out and just talk to congregations or just talk to the people, not congregations, but the people heading up the churches and just kind of get a feel for them. So that I can recommend or not, people to these, to these bodies, these structures, because I do think that things are a matter of maturity. And so I encourage, I've got some Pentecostal churches in certain areas like Phoenix that I would recommend still to this day, but it's just like, is there stuff, but I'd also give them with a little bit of a warning label.
Oh yeah, you're going to need to outgrow this. And that's the second question. After you've outgrown that pot, you need what next? And that would be what beyond. Yeah.
I mean, I had an experience when I was over there with the New Thought churches in the area. And I loved a lot of the people, but there was certain characters that really disrupted and eventually kind of dissolved a couple of the churches that I thought were like, man, I just really, I have a problem with that. Nobody kind of would stand up to them. And I think that's part of the change that needs to happen too, because it's like, that's part of that value structure of meaning that we need to stand up for. We don't have to be absolutist about it, but if it's not loving and it is coming more from ego. And it was interesting. There was this one specific New Thought church, which I thought was kind of funny. What they'd done is they'd taken, I guess the minister used to be a Christian minister. I mean, like in a regular fundamentalist group. And what he'd done is he'd taken all the hymns and taken the word Jesus and substituted universe, because a lot of the people were older and they didn't like that association. So it kind of like, it felt like, it was strange for me, because it's like, how great the universe is, how great the universe is, oh, what a friend we have in the universe.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't mention his name, because why? But then when I started going to visiting, when I could, going to Michael Bickworth's church, who's an outgrowth of the New Thought movement and is not specifically a New Thought minister in the last 10, 20, 15 years, I guess. I mean, he'd extrapolated from a lot of the New Thought kind of innovation. And there was a lovely like Aramaic minister there that I loved it when she got there, because she could take from the New Testament and really have some fun with it.
I bet. No, that would be good. Yes.
It would. And anybody who's in LA, I always recommend that. Because it's like, it's just fun, if nothing else. I mean, but there's definitely that spirituality.
It should always at least be that, loving and fun, and a little moral structure is good too.
But I think some of the disinfectant here is getting over some of our associative type of feelings, about certain groups, and just say that, hey, we're all in this together, and there's going to be some things that appeal within different faith structures, with different spiritual inquiries. And if we have experience with them, we can say, hey, try this, but maybe put a warning label on it. This part might not be for you. But I think if we really got into the communities and really, got a feel for people, if we have the time, get a feel, or, there's always movers and shakers. It's like, and what you're talking about with what's at the back of the church is the growth rather than the Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes. That was a very important point. Yes.
I think that's a hangover from making the church your business. Because when I was starting my business, I looked at a couple of business kind of management schools just to kind of help manage my business, to kind of get an idea of how do I grow my business? How do I scale it? And I asked a lot of questions, and they started with like, well, our first couple of stages of business management, how to manage business, how to grow a business, you really have to care for the people. But and I'm like, oh, I'm totally about that. I love people.
Oh yeah.
I can see that. I'm like, you care, you have an integrity product or service that you bring to them. but it was interesting. And then this stage is where you start, refining the numbers, refining what you're doing. It's just like, so you're gently just kind of drawing back and focusing less on the people. And then you're focusing more on what you're calling integrity. But it's really what it is. You're getting away from the people by focusing on numbers, by focusing on this so-called scaling. And I have serious doubts about it. And then, they were all proud of themselves. And then you'll have a company that has 1,000 employees and you'll have thousands of customers. And I go, quantity is good. I'm not decrying that, but quality is better. And I think if there, and so the quality of the relationship, the quality of teaching when it comes to spirituality, I think it's not just involving these bit more innovative practices like the contemplative traditions and the wisdom traditions, but I think it is getting away from quality really is better than quantity. And just, if we're doing the right thing, it's going to take off, in the right way. Yes, sir.
Keep the quality horse in front of the quantity cart.
Yeah.
Don't get your cart in front of the horse.
Michael.
Yeah, in terms of power and growth and quantity, I'm reminded. I always think back through scripture sometimes because I had such a background in it. But the notion that when you pray, it's better to pray at home alone than on the street corner out loud like televangelists, etc., and on and on. So that there is this, we have a culture of capitalism, which historically has its strengths, but it's always a growth and a capitalizing. And so we've ended up in this country and around the world of, a few people concentrating a whole bunch of wealth, which is also opportunity. Wealth having to do with, can you afford medicine? Can you afford quality education? Can you afford all these things? And we've concentrated it in the hands of a few. And I think part of the reason that the previous president of this country announcing his presidency by saying, "I'm rich," I think that resonated with a lot of the evangelical fundamentalists in this country who helped prop him up enough in the South because of just this total sick religious meaning that growth meant you were blessed by God. More money meant you were blessed by God. And so if you had those things as a part of your life, your business, your church attendance or whatever, then it was clear that you were right with God, as opposed to going to a quiet place in your home and praying, meditating, Tom,
Yeah. Well, it's a prayer of silence. And you're talking about prosperity gospel. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Right. Amen, 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 amen.
And I think that's part of, in our culture, in this country, why there was so much evangelical support of the previous president.
But there's also something to be said, like Michael Bickworth is very much, not so much a prosperity gospel person, but very much about the power of individual agency. And that attracted me, and it attracts a lot of young people to his church and to people like him, because he's saying, and it was sad. Nothing that kind of happened in the New Thought group for me that kind of like turned me away, actually, because I thought there was some very innovative stuff happening. Is that one minister told me, I was like, we don't think we can appeal to young people because it takes a certain maturity to understand our teachings. And I'm like, what? It's like, basically the young people are our future. And it's just like, and I think what you're speaking to, Michael, is that there is a version of success that was being appealed to in that. And it's just like, but that we have capacities, and that, and the young people need to see that it's like, no, it's not inevitable that you're not going to be able to get a job because there's too many people with college degrees now, and there's not enough jobs to fill them, or not enough money, high enough jobs to get. It's just like, I applaud any kind of innovation going on with young people. I've seen it in my travels the last year. People like Michael Bickworth, who kind of encourage that, like, you can do it. The universe is for you. It's conspiring for you, is one of his phrases. And it's just like, what if we got that mentality, but didn't have that Trumpian kind of interpretation of like, it's all about money. It's just like, well, what if it was about like, we can kind of be this, and even with what we're talking about with, yes, there is that time for, and we definitely need to have that time for just reflection and having the individual prayer time. But something I've been trying to focus on down in Santa Fe is kind of like, there's a meditation group that they don't see necessarily the benefit of group meditation versus individual meditation. And group meditation has a different flavor to it. I mean, and if you've got a couple real good group meditators, man, there's an ecstasis in that I don't think I've not had with an individual meditation. And it's just like, and so, and it's very similar to what I experienced in the Pentecostal church, when people were just like, we can do this for the Lord. And I'm sure you've seen this, Terry, with your Black church. It's just like, there's just, when we come together with that group spirit and that group think, and just with that benevolence kind of undergirding that, and that true caring and concern, there's a supernatural power to it. I call it spiritual physics or divine physics. When you're appropriating yourself to that. And again, Beckwith talks about that and refers to it. And this is the only thing I thought lacking in this discussion, because it's like, at the end of this discussion, they were kind of talking about, well, we need to bring things back to, the reason why science and scientism is winning is because they kind of move forward through rationalism. And we need to kind of have more of a rationalism within the church and religions. And I'm like, I'm not against that. And I think that would help. But I get it. Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to briefly say, I went to a centering prayer, sort of a day of centering prayer, about, I think, 2 or 3 Saturdays back. I went to one 6 months ago. And that's it. We just do the centering prayer, sit, walk. It's a lot of silence, some reading of a scripture or something from Thomas Keating or whatever. But and I do a lot by myself, and that's good to meditate, to prayer of silence by yourself. But it's so much more so when you're with others. That's why before COVID, I would go once a week to the local Catholic church, to the chapel, which is a subset of the church itself, and sit. Because it's just, you need to be with as well as by yourself. That's all I got to say on that.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, and excuse my voice. I have allergies. But, the 4 horsemen dealt with the true and the good and the beauty, which are ancient Greek categories. So the true is, what can we know? The good is, what ought we to do? And then the beauty part of it. What they did not do, I think what they did not do is say that the first 2 should be knocked out in terms of the beauty. They said the first 2 should be a part of it, so that science, not scientism, has value. And the question of what ought I to do, the good, has value, because that can contribute to human growth and the lack of wars. But that the beauty part of it is something that had been, excuse me, not addressed as well in terms of religious meaning. And so they centered in, this is something I really thought was good about these guys, 2 hours of them, was that they centered in on that part which can help be transformative, which can help get us through. It's like one of the guys, that may have been, I forget who it was. It was the bishop who was talking about Rolling Stone in an interview, asking rock stars what was the first song that knocked you out? And the question was not, what was the first song that you liked? It was what was the first song that really knocked you out? And that, I thought, was an extremely incisive point that the bishop made. And that's what they're pointing to. And in terms of religious meaning, you know, that I agree that that a whole bunch of church life had been flattening, whether it's from a boring sermon or whatever, but that the liturgical side of church can help us, and the art of the churches can help us if we're able to transcend dogma and go to the transformative elements of religious experience, which has made a lot of people's lives robust, as opposed to just flattened and meaningless and hopeless, you know.
And I would add to that also, and I want to hear what Terry's thoughts are after this, but I think something that's very, what I find, I like the Old Testament lectures of Jordan Peterson's, but something I really enjoy, because I'm a youth at heart, and I know what kind of appeals to young people. I think I do, at least, but it is really how, like, Peterson's like lectures from the classroom, and also Pageau's like movie criticisms kind of thing. To me, I love those, and I was trying to figure out, why do I love those so much? It's because it's addressing popular culture, but it's also seeing how how the framework of these things are not just entertainment, that there are moral value type of propositions that are coming through in this entertainment. So one of my favorite things by Pageau is his criticism on Batman. And it's just 15 minutes, and it's awesome. He just kind of like takes it through. And I think it was Batman Begins. It's one of Nolan's ones, where he talks about, this is the sacrificial aspect of the cross. And I'm like, this is brilliant. And when Jordan Peterson's talking about the show Breaking Bad, and how the moral decline within that show, and just how that, I think these to me have tremendous spiritual value. And I think churches should be using these things, you know, because a lot of young people are caught up in popular culture. And it's almost like people have this kind of, you know, either or mentality, like they need to just get out of public culture, you know, that culture. No, that's not going to happen. But it's just like, can that be utilized to enforce a deeper spiritual inquiry? Yes, it can. So, you know, I've had to do it myself with my son. We watched South Park when he was young. It was not a pretty thing for me to do. I thought the show was disgusting, but it's just like, I'm glad I did it, because we had a real father-son talk, because I really wanted to have that, and he loved that show, and because it was just not just shock junk, but there was those things going on there. Terry, what do you have to say?
Oh, I'm just enjoying listening, but I am curious about your point a couple minutes ago, Clint. I thought I understood you to say that at the end, all three speakers culminate on, we need to be more rational about the mystery. I must have misheard you. Did they really? They didn't come to that, did they?
Yeah, how rationalism needs to be part, specifically, it was Bishop Barron's main point, right, Tom? Would you say? Because you watched it all just like I did. Is that the sense you got?
That's the sense. I was going to comment more on that True, Good, and Beautiful after Terry and you were done with this one. But yeah, there was talk in that direction. You know, what Michael was saying, all of them got to be a part of the picture, but more on that after Terry's done and you and Terry are done.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. My orientation on truth, beauty, and goodness is from Integral, and it was a big aha when they started talking about integrating truth and beauty and goodness, that the three are in natural tension with each other, and the challenge is to integrate them. That was like such a big aha for me. Steve McIntosh does a thing on that. So that's all I got at this point.
All right, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I do that to slow me down, mute myself, put the hand up, wait my turn, give someone else a time to speak. But basically, what Michael was saying about the true, the good, and the beautiful, and of course, I'm thinking Ken Wilber and integral as well, like Terry is, and integrating the three. And there's this saying, my spin on this, how do you get from an it to an ought? And I say I, and put that into quadrants: it, true; ought, good, and I being the beautiful. And then I mash it up. How you get from an it to an ought is through the I. And I think Martin Buber, I hyphen thou, God, or whatever that mystery is in the hyphen. That's how you get from an it to an ought, or from the true science, not scientism, to the good. You get through the beautiful, through the individual. I like, you like, I hyphen thou, and somehow God, all the magic of the integrating and getting to what's good, and it's in that hyphen. Yeah, I'm just going to add the song, Let the Mystery Be, and all that. I'm done.
Yeah, that reminded me, I like getting pictures in my head of these kind of things. Is that there's a scene in the movie Unbreakable. Have you guys seen that movie? It's Bruce Willis and Lawrence Fishburne. It's all about comic books, and I was a huge comic book fan growing up. But there's this one great scene. So a little bit of a spoiler here is that Lawrence Fishburne is helping Bruce Willis realize that he's a superhero.
He's what?
He's helping him realize that he's a superhero, that Bruce Willis is a superhero. That's a big part of the objective of the movie. But what the twist is, because it's a Shyamalan movie, is the twist is that he is a villain, that Lawrence Fishburne is a villain, and he's lonely because they're no heroes. So he actually he's been looking for a hero for most of his life to be the counter to his being the big villain. Because otherwise, without the hero, we have no villain, really, But there's one thing that he tells him to do to be that hero. He says, go out into Grand Central Station and just open your arms, and just kind of like, because he has this intuitive ability of where the crimes are, and he's just like, so a lot of it's just go out there. It's what Yeshua said. Jesus said, go out there, see what happens. It's when we have a pathology of order that says you need to do this, the ought. And I feel like it's the same thing with things in the commons. Sometimes we need to balance things between an order and an openness. And any kind of social gathering is like there needs to be that kind of order, but there also needs to make sure we have that space for othering, for openness, for emergent properties to arise within the individuals and within the group dynamic. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and when we do go out there, as you say, as these guys were discussing the need for connectedness and the need to, how do we get to beyond the bifurcations of religious meaning and get some religious meaning that can advance us individually and culturally, etc. I recalled when I was going through some of this, a little booklet about a half-inch thick that I have somewhere that talked about treating other people as you want to be treated, which is an axiom of love, really. If you want to get connected, love would seem, I don't know if the term love was ever mentioned in these 2 hours. Mm-hmm. But in that book, it showed where that notion of loving your neighbor as yourself, where it comes up in religious documents. And it was spread out all over the place, from Eastern to Western and Protestant to Catholic and whatnot. That fundamental notion is there in the literature of most of the religious traditions. It's all there. They all sensed that great religious meaning of what our religious tradition can be.
Yes.
It was those kernels of truth and beauty have been there, Eastern and Western traditions.
It's just like why we have in the Crew Statement, it's just like recovering the essence of Christ, because the essence of Christ is actually, I feel, is a behavioral set of love. So it's just like, so I don't look at it as far as the surface brand image or logo of Jesus, as much as it is, if you look at these traditions, how are they being consonant with a certain behavioral set of love? Because, and so I feel that Christ was that epitome of the behavioral set of love, but I don't think he was an egotist and is an egotist, but it's just like, so whenever I see that character within any religion, faith, or inquiry, to me, that's what I want to bring out the best attributes of that inquiry, the love aspects of that inquiry. And I trust that alignment to those characteristics will bring out the fullest and best version of that. And I see the body of Christ now, not so much denominations, but that inquiry within different faith structures. That to me is Peter's vision. When he was talking about beyond the scope of Judaism, I feel he was talking about this character set of Jesus that was going to be permeating throughout the world, not the name, the logo, the brand, but rather all of the complementary aspects, the body of knowledge and understanding that can be transformative to make our world into the best version of itself.
Yes, and you know, my older view of Jesus, and even my younger view, was that he was essentially a radical Nazarene coming out of the great prophetic social justice demands of the great Old Testament prophets. Oddly enough, of course, the culture, political and religious culture of his day, pinned him on the cross for being king of the Jews, right, which is the alternative, which is the sick alternative to a radical Nazarene. He never was, never claimed to be, never wanted to be any kind of political. He was essentially about reconciliation and moral honesty. If any of you without sin start throwing stones at this harlot, I mean, the last thing he was and wanted to be was some sort of cultural king, going to the temptations. Right. They were all about exalting himself, and oddly enough, he was nailed, being accused of an exaltation that he never. Right. Yeah. So
well, not only that, but if you'll permit me a bit of a tangent to an adventure I've had over the last month. I took my Black Bishop, Bishop Thomas, to a book club on the Christian alternative to critical race theory. And it was quite an adventure. But one of the points that one of the people made there was clearly if Jesus was about social justice, he did a terrible job of it. And there's plenty of other people in history who would make much better exemplars of social justice.
Awesome.
Who? Who in particular? Did he tell you the day?
That person did not say.
But I applaud you for that effort. You're a fellow warrior. I already knew that. So it's just Nalani has heard this.
I have some juicy video clips from that, but I'm not supposed to share them. They're not authorized for sharing. So I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to be sinful and share them anyway.
Sin! Sounds like Satan.
All right. Well, I think we're varying a little bit off, and we've been on.
Oh yeah.
But I love this discussion, ladies.
No more tangents.
Yes. I don't know if there's any closing kind of thoughts we'd like to finish this off with, but I think we've accomplished something of distilling the Four Horsemen. Yes, sir.
I want to state my appreciation of our kitty cat here, OJ, because OJ exemplified a silent, meditative view when she joined our.
She did.
When she joined our group, so she contributed in her example what many of us could learn from.
I echo that. Terry.
Amen. And Tom, I just have a little technical note.
Yep.
In order to, excuse me, not Tom, Clint. in order to reserve the coffee house, you want to put CH1 in parentheses in the event. I think that's why Leilani just jumped in here. She came not knowing that you had it reserved.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I made mention of that to Zach as well. And he knows so much. Yeah, I learned the hard way, but I learned to listen to Terry. And to read the actual instructions when you're doing
always read the instructions.
That's why I seem so smart, because after I'm a dumbass and screw up a lot, I start paying attention to people who know something about the subject.
So anyway, any other final thoughts on the video? Even though you haven't seen the whole thing, Terry, I know you're looking forward to it now.
I am, and thank you for calling this together.
Thank you. And Tom, finishing thoughts, and then we'll.
No, it's great. I really love the whole thing. I watched it like 3 weeks after you posted, watched the whole thing and made notes and everything. So that's what I do.
Great. And Michael?
As usual, I always thank people who come in and join our discussion, and I always grow from it, or try to. And so thank you for coming very much.
And I did record this, so we'll have this for posterity's sake, and those who want to comment in the comments, and hopefully we can grow off this for the next, and I'm taking suggestions for the next time we do this. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you.
Bye-bye.